Yeah, so good evening, students. So in the previous session, we started discussing a few things with regards to the process of mechanism of evolution, right? So under mechanism of evolution, we started off with the second mechanism of evolution, right? So the first one, what we took up was with regards to the process called as the Hardy-Weinberg principle. And the second mechanism, what we started off is with regards to some sort of evolutionary forces, right? So in the previous session and in before session also, we started discussing about different types of evolutionary forces, right? So two mechanisms of evolutions, what we started off. One is we have completely done with the Hardy-Weinberg principle or the Hardy-Weinberg equation. The second mechanism is we started off with something called as the evolutionary forces. So with regards to the evolutionary forces, we took up different types of evolutionary forces, of which the first one what we saw was with regards to the process of natural selection, right? So we saw what is natural selection and what are the different types of natural selections also which are operating in different types of environmental conditions, right? So if you could just recollect what we have seen in the previous session, we began with the first one called as the stabilizing selection. The second one was called the directional selection, and the third one was called as the disruptive selection. We saw few details about in which type of environment each of these type of natural selections would operate, and what exactly is the essence of these different types of natural selections, right? So a quick relook of what we have seen in the previous session, then we'll get into today's topics, right? So first we began with something called as the stabilizing selection. So what did we say with regards to stabilizing selection? So in which type of environmental conditions do stabilizing selection operate? It would usually operate in a stable environmental conditions, right? So that's what we saw with regards to stabilizing environment, right? And what happens in a stabilizing environment? Organisms present towards the mean phenotypic value, they alone are being preserved, while the individuals present towards both the extreme ends are being eliminated from the population. That was the first one what we saw, stabilizing selection. The second type of selection what we saw is called the directional selection. So what did we say in directional selection? So this sort of a selection usually operates in an environment which undergoes gradual changes, right? Slow and gradual changes. So the environment which undergoes slow and gradual changes, we have this selection called the directional selection being operated. So what happens in this directional selection, right? So the individuals present towards one end of the phenotypic distribution are being selected, are being preserved, while the other end, what we also saw was due to this sort of selection, what is happening? The mean average value or the average phenotypic value is continuously shifted towards the other end of the phenotypic distribution curve, right? So that's what we saw with regards to directional selection, and we took up a couple of examples also with regards to directional selection. The third one what we saw is called as the disruptive selection. And what did we say with regards to disruptive selection? This type of selection usually operates whenever a homogeneous environment changes into a heterogeneous type, right? So whenever a homogeneous environment changes into a heterogeneous type, then we have this type of selection, that is disruptive selection, being operated. So I also told you that this is considered as one of the rarest of the three types of selection. Even though it is considered the rarest, it is most important in the evolution of two or more than two species population, right? So that's what we saw with disruptive selection. So what happens in this disruptive selection? Individuals present towards both the extremes of the phenotypic distribution alone are being selected, are being preserved, while individuals attaining the mean phenotypic character or mean phenotypic value, they are eliminated from the population, leading to the evolution of two or more subspecies or two or more subpopulation, right? So this is what we said. And we also said that if these two subpopulation, if they do not have the ability to interbreed among themselves, that is, if they are said to be reproductively isolated, then they would be evolved into two new species. Some examples also we saw, right? Darwin's finches, all adaptive radiation can be considered as some sort of disruptive selection, what we saw. So that was with the first environmental factor or environmental force regarding to the process of mechanism, which was the natural selection. The second one what we saw was the gene flow, that is movement of alleles from one population to the other population, from donor population to the recipient population, immigration and was genetic load. So what did we say with regards to genetic load? Presence of, right? So presence of a deleterious gene or existence of a deleterious gene in a particular population is actually considered as the genetic load or the gene load, right? So one example also we took up with regards to sickle cell anemia, right? So the heterozygous condition of the sickle cell gene is said to be a disadvantageous gene. It is said to be a deleterious gene in that particular population, even though it has one advantage. What is that advantage? We have already seen it when we were talking about genetics, right? So individuals who are said to be heterozygous for sickle cell anemia are said to be resistant to malaria, right? Even though that advantage is there, this particular heterozygote gene for sickle cell is actually considered as a deleterious gene in that particular population, right? So the fourth one what we took up is, right, we started off with that, we called it as genetic drift, right? So quickly going through genetic drift again. So what is this genetic drift? The random changes, three things I told you all to remember, right, in the previous session. One is random changes in the gene frequency, right? Random changes in the gene frequency present in a small population, that is the second one, in a small population, right, due to chance but not by natural selection. So this we started calling it as the genetic drift, right? So I just told you, I took a simple example also in determining or how we start looking up to this particular genetic drift. So any random changes that occur in a small population by chance and not by natural selection is called as genetic drift. So we have two examples to study under genetic drift. One is called founder's effect and the other one is called bottleneck effect. So in this session, let us start taking up with the founder's effect as well as the bottleneck effect, and then we'll try concluding this particular topic with regards to the mechanism of evolution, right? So now let's take up with the founder's effect as well as the other one, which is called the bottleneck effect. So I told you we have two examples to study under genetic drift, right? So the first one is called as the founder's effect. So let's begin with the first one, which is founder's effect. So what happens in this founder's effect, or what is this founder's effect all about? Directly we'll get into the topic. So I'll just give you a clear explanation of what this founder's effect is all about. Now, let's just consider that there are two populations, right? There are two populations. So this is population A, right? And there is one more population. So in this population, let's suppose that there are 10 individuals in this population, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 individuals in this particular population, right? So there are 10 individuals in the population A. Now, from this 10 individuals in this population, in a far off place, there is another population being present. There is another population. Let's assume that this is population B, right? So let us assume that this is population B. Now, just suppose two of the individuals from population A has migrated to population B, right? So let's consider one has come out of the population. Similarly, two also has come out of the population, right? So individual 1 and individual 2 has come out of the population. Now these two individuals, right, individual 1 and individual 2 will now start getting into this population B, right? So they would now start getting into population B. So here is population 1 or individual 1 and individual 2. Right. Now these two individuals, 1 and 2, are considered as founders of this particular population. Getting it? Right? So these two individuals, individual 1 and individual 2, is actually considered as the founders of this particular population, population B. Right. Now when these two individuals, now when they start interbreeding among themselves, they would give rise to their offspring or the descendants. And let's suppose that the descendants here would be 1A, 1B, 1C, 2A, 2B, and 2C. So these are the descendants in this particular population. Now, all of these descendants, 1A, 1B, 1C, 2A, 2B, 2C, all of these descendants will be genetically similar to that of the founders, but not but it's not similar to that of their original parental type or original ancestors. This is what we call it as the founder's effect, right? So getting it, what is this founder's effect now, right? Founder's effect is nothing but two populations are there. Population A, right? Say there are 10 individuals in this population, right? Out of the 10 individuals in the population, individual 1 and 2 have migrated from this population. Now, if they move on from this population, there will be some sort of changes here in the gene pool, right? That's what we are actually talking about, evolutionary forces. What does evolutionary force mean? Any change which brings about, or any forces which brings about some sort of changes in the gene pool is regarded as an evolutionary force. Now here again, because of the movement of these two individuals out of the population, the gene pool is being changed here. Similarly, a new gene pool is being created here in this particular place. Now these two individuals who have moved out of the population, right? So individual 1 and individual 2 who have now moved out of the population, these two individuals are actually considered as founders of this particular population, population B. Now, once they start interbreeding among themselves, they would give rise to their offsprings, their descendants, right? And all their descendants would be genetically similar to the founders of the population, but not their original ancestors. This we start calling it as the founders effect, right? One type of genetic drift what we have, right? I hope founders effect is clear, right? Now, next moving on to the next type of effect, which is called as the bottleneck effect. So let's see what this bottleneck effect is all about. Bottleneck effect also is almost more or less similar to this, but there is some sort of variation seen in bottleneck, right? So B1 here, what will be taking up, right? So B would be bottleneck effect. Bottleneck effect, right? So what happens in this bottleneck effect? Again, let us start considering the same detail, right? Say in a population A, or in a particular habitat, say A, there are different individuals being present, right? So just imagine there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Then we have 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, right? So these are the different individuals which are present in this particular population A. Now, there is some sort of natural calamity or natural disaster occurring in this particular population, right? So what is happening in this particular population A? There is some sort of natural calamity or natural disaster happening in this sort of population. So what do we mean by natural calamity or natural disaster? It could be either an earthquake or a flood or volcanic eruption or drought or a famine, right? So this particular population A is subjected to, right? It is subjected to some sort of natural disaster. Because of that natural disaster, the size of the population drastically reduces, right? So because of that natural disaster, what is happening? The size of the population is drastically reducing. So what does that mean? Size of the population is reducing means what? Most of the individuals present in this population would die because of that natural disaster. Now let's assume that all of these individuals have died, but luckily 2 individuals have survived. That is, say 6 and 7 have been survived. Now this individuals 6 and 7 would come out of this particular population, right, and would start inhabiting another population, right? So 6 and 7, they would start inhabiting another population here, such that these individuals now may be genetically different from the other individuals. Okay? Because of the natural disaster happening in this particular population A, most of the individuals present in population A has been killed. They have died because of that natural disaster. But just imagine, let's suppose that 2 of the individuals have survived that natural disaster. Now, these 2 individuals who have survived, that is 6 and 7 who have survived, they would be genetically different from the original population present in A. Right. Now they would migrate to another population, say another new population, population B, right? They would migrate to population B, and there they would start interbreeding among themselves, and again giving rise to a new offspring, 6A, 6B, 6C, 7A, 7B, 7C, right? Again, leading to the formation of their descendants as well as the offsprings. Now, these descendants also would be genetically similar to these two individuals, 6 and 7, but not to the original ancestral genotype. Right? Original, they would not resemble their ancestors genetically, but they would start resembling their founders. Right? So these survivors genetically. This is what we call it as bottleneck effect. So bottleneck here refers to some sort of a natural disaster or a natural calamity. Right? So bottleneck usually refers to some sort of a natural disaster. Now, because of the natural disaster, what is happening? Most of the individuals in population A are being killed. The ones who are survived, right? So these survivors, they may be genetically different from that of the original population present in A. Now they would migrate or move on to a new population, and in that new population they would start interbreeding among themselves. So once they interbreed among themselves, what would happen now? They would again give rise to their offspring, and all of those offsprings would be genetically similar to that of the survivors and not similar to that of the original parental ancestors, right? So this is what we call it as the bottleneck effect. So if you could imagine, if you could just observe here, both the effects what you are saying, either the founders effect or the bottleneck effect, usually occurs in a very small population. That is the reason why the changes are seen more frequently, right? Changes can be easily observed because it is a small population. If the same thing happens in a larger population, the changes will not be seen. The best example what we have taken yesterday, right? Loss of one gene in 10,000 doesn't make much difference, but loss of one gene or one allele out of one would make a huge difference. So here, the same thing is happening here, as well as the bottleneck effect. Sorry, the founders effect also, right? So this is what we have with the founders effect as well as the bottleneck effect, right? So two examples pertaining to genetic drift. So what is happening in founders effect? What did we see happening in founders effect? Some of the individuals from population A has moved out of the population, right? So these individuals who have moved out of the population into a new population would be considered as the founders of that particular population. And those individuals would again genetically be different from that of their ancestral individuals. Now these founders, now they start interbreeding among themselves, they start producing their own offsprings, right, or the descendants, and all of those descendants also will be similar to that of the founders of that population genetically, but not to their ancestral or rather the parental genotype or the parental genetic distribution. Right. Next, talking about bottleneck effect. With regards to bottleneck effect, what we have seen is in a small population, due to this bottleneck or the natural calamities, most of the individuals usually die. The population size is being drastically reduced because of these natural disasters or bottleneck. As a result of which, what is happening? The survivors who are present may be genetically different from that of their original parental type. Now these survivors, they move to a new place, a new habitat or a new population. There they start interbreeding among themselves, as a result of which they would start getting their descendants or offsprings, and all of these offsprings or descendants would be similar to that of the survivors and not to that of their original ancestors. Right? So this is what we have with the topic called as genetic drift. So four important things we have seen, or four important evolutionary forces we have discussed so far. One is natural selection. Second one is gene flow, what we also call it as gene migration. The third one is genetic load, and the fourth one is genetic drift. Right? Now moving on to the next one, number 5 would be mutation. Right? So the number 5 or the fifth natural, or rather the fifth evolutionary force would be something called as mutation. So we are not going to get into much of mutations because we have already spoke about mutation, right? So number 5 would be mutation, and number 6 would be genetic recombination. So this also we have already discussed. Just a quick look about these two and then we'll proceed to our next topic, right? So what is mutation? Mutation, we have discussed a lot about mutation in our previous chapter and in this chapter also. With regards to the mutation theory, we have already discussed. So what is this mutation all about? Any sudden change or any random change, any random sudden inheritable change that occurs in an organism is called as mutation. Right? Now, as per Hugo de Vries, mutation is considered as the raw material for evolution, and that's what we have seen in his postulate, right? So, what did we see in the first postulate of mutation theory? He said that, or rather, Hugo de Vries said that mutations are considered as the raw materials for evolution. So, without mutations, there is no evolution. Right? So, mutation is also considered as one of the major evolutionary forces pertaining to the process of evolution. Right? So mutation. Right? Next, talking about genetic recombination. So this also we have seen a lot of times, right? Genetic recombination. So what do we mean by genetic recombination? It is the exchange of genetic material between two non-sister chromatids of a homologous pair of chromosomes. Right? So we know that genetic recombination is the basis of variation, and we are also sure that variations are the basis for evolution. Right? So for evolution to occur, variations are necessary. And how do variations naturally come in? Because of the exchange of genetic material between two non-sister chromatids of a homologous pair of chromosomes. This is what we call it as the genetic recombination. Again, mutation as well as genetic recombination, both are considered as the crucial evolutionary forces bringing about the process of evolution. Right? So 6 important factors, or rather forces, pertaining to the process of evolution we have seen so far, right? The first one is natural selection. Under natural selection, we took up with something called as the stabilizing selection, directional selection, and the third one is disruptive selection. Second one, what we took up is the genetic flow or gene migration. The third one, what we saw is genetic load, existence of a deleterious gene in a population, genetic load. The fourth one, what we saw was, we just completed with that, genetic drift. Under genetic drift, we saw about 2 important examples. One was called the founder's effect, and the other one is called as the bottleneck effect. And the fifth one would be mutation, and the sixth one would be genetic recombination. Right? So with this, we'll be done with our topic called as the mechanism of evolution. So 2 mechanisms of evolution we have discussed so far. One was the Hardy-Weinberg principle. Any deviation from Hardy-Weinberg principle would lead to the process of evolution. Right? Second mechanism what we saw is this evolutionary forces. Right? So these evolutionary forces also would bring about some sort of evolution, or it would result in the process of evolution. Right? So there are several other theories, but these two are the major mechanisms where most of the scientists follow even till date, pertaining to the process of evolution. Right? So with this, we'll be done with our topic called as the theories of evolution as well as the mechanism of evolution also. Right? I hope all are clear with this topics what we have discussed so far. Right? So till now, we have seen a lot of things pertaining to the process of evolution, starting from the origin of the universe. Right? So different theories we saw pertaining to the origin of universe as well as the origin of life on the earth. Right? So that was a starting class what we took up with. Right? So different theories explaining the origin of life on the earth. Then we saw about the different theories of then we moved on into different evidences pertaining to the process of evolution. Right? Evidences from cell biology, evidences from molecular biology, evidences from fossils, paleontology, evidences from embryology, evidences from comparative anatomy. Right? So different evidences we have taken up. Right? And along with that, we moved on into major important theories pertaining to the process of evolution. Lamarck's theory, the Darwin's theory, the mutation theory, modern synthetic theory, and finally we spoke about the mechanism of evolution. Right. So after dealing so much about evolution, what we'll do now is we'll start putting everything what we have seen so far in a nutshell. Right. So we'll start summarizing everything what we have seen so far. Right. So what we'll be taking up now is considered as the brief account of evolution. Right. So the topic what we'll be taking up now, right? The topic what we'll be taking up now is the brief account of evolution. So let's begin with this. Brief account of evolution. So what we are going to do now is just summarize everything pertaining to the process of evolution, right? The brief account of evolution. Let's begin with when life actually originated, right? So most of the scientists, right? Most of the scientists believe that the first non-cellular life forms, right? Most of the scientists believe that the first non-cellular life forms originated about 3,000 million years ago, right? So you can just make a note of it, right? So what most of the scientists believe is the first non-cellular life forms originated almost 3,000 million years ago. MYA stands for million, right? BYA stands for billion, right? 3,000 million years ago. This was the first non-cellular life forms originated, right? Then, what again the scientists believe is the first cellular life form, the first cellular life form originated almost 2,000 million years ago, right? So the first non-cellular life form originated 3,000 million years ago, while the first cellular life forms originated almost 2,000 million years ago. Right. Now, once the first cellular life form originated, we have already discussed which was the first cellular life form to be originated and where it was originated also we have already seen when we were discussing about the origin of the universe. So if you could start recollecting the theories, right, the last theory what we saw, right, the theory of chemical evolution, right, given by Oparin and Haldane, biological evolution, there we get to know which were the first life forms actually to be formed. Right. So the first non-cellular life forms, right? The first non-cellular life forms originated 3,000 million years ago, while the first cellular life forms originated 2,000 million years ago. The next one what we have is, right? Next one what we have is invertebrates. Invertebrates, they originated, right? Invertebrates originated almost 500 million years ago, right? Invertebrates originated almost 500 million years ago, right? The next one what we have is jawless fish. Jawless fishes, right? So jawless fishes, right? So these jawless fishes originated almost 350 million years ago, right? So the jawless fishes originated almost 350 million years ago, right? Try to get this right, right? So first non-cellular life forms originated 3,000 million years ago. First cellular life forms originated 2,000 million years ago. Invertebrates originated 500 million years ago, and jawless fishes originated 350 million years ago. This is what you need to remember. Now what happened? After the jawless fishes evolved, right? After the jawless fishes evolved, some of these fishes, right? Some of these fishes with snout, right? So some of the fishes with a snout, I hope all are familiar with snout. Snout is nothing but a nose-like structure which protrudes further, right? So some of the fishes with snout and strong fins I hope all are familiar with fins, right? So some of the fishes, that is jawless fishes, having a snout, right? Having a snout and strong fins. So when we say strong fins, most of the books it will be written as strong lobe fins, right? So the fins are said to be lobed. Strong and lobe fins. There are different lobes in the fins. We start calling them as lobe-finned fishes. For some example, what we can give is the coelacanth fish. We have something called as the dipnoid fishes, right? So lungfishes, they are all said to be lobe-finned fishes, right? Now, once the jawless fishes evolved around 350 million years ago, some of the fishes, right? Some of the fishes with a snout and strong lobed fins, they moved into the land, right? So they moved into land, right? So once they moved into land, they now got evolved into, right? They now got evolved into a group of organisms called as amphibians. Called as amphibian. This also the scientists say it was approximately 350 million years ago only. Right? So get again, right? So what happens? Once the jawless fishes have been evolved almost 350 million years ago, some of these fishes with a snout and a strong fins, which we call it as the lobed fins, they moved into the land. So once they moved into the land, they now got evolved into a group of organisms called as amphibians, which occurred almost 350 million years ago. So that's how amphibians got evolved. So we usually say that amphibians have been evolved from fishes. So how they have evolved from fishes? Some of the fishes, they moved into the land, and these fishes which moved into the land now got evolved into reptiles. Sorry, they got evolved into amphibians around 350 million years ago. That's how amphibians have been formed. So I hope everything is clear till now, right? First non-cellular life forms 3000 million years ago. First cellular life forms 2000 million years ago. Invertebrates 500 million years ago. Jawless fishes 350 million years ago. Then some of these fishes having a snout and strong fins, that is lobed fins, they moved into the land and got evolved into amphibians almost 350 million years ago. Right? So clear with this so far? Right? Clear with this so far? Now, once amphibians have formed, once amphibians have been evolved, what happened next? Some of these amphibians, right? Some of the amphibians. So once amphibians got evolved, some of these amphibians, right? So once amphibians got evolved, some of these amphibians now got evolved into reptiles. Right? So some of these amphibians, they now got evolved into reptiles. And these reptiles started dominating the entire terrestrial habitat. Right? So what happened? The jawless fishes from the water, they came into the land, they moved into the land, right? And in the land, they started to evolve into a group of organisms called as amphibians. Now these amphibians, some of these amphibians, they got evolved into another group of organisms or called as the reptiles. Now these reptiles started dominating the entire terrestrial habitat. There were some of them were said to be very large. Some example what we can give is the dinosaurs, right? So dinosaurs was said to be belonging to this particular class called as the reptile. So it was very large. So one of the largest reptile, several times this question was asked, right? So one of the largest reptile is called as Tyrannosaurus. It is called Tyrannosaurus rex, right? So this is one of the largest reptile, which is called as Tyrannosaurus rex, which is approximately 20 feet tall, right? Which was approximately 20 feet tall, right? And it had huge dagger-like teeth, right? It had huge dagger-like teeth, right? So this was the largest reptile, which was actually known to be present on the earth, right? Tyrannosaurus rex, right? And because of their huge size, they actually started dominating the entire terrestrial habitat, right? Now, then what happened? Once reptiles have been formed or evolved, and once they started to dominate the entire terrestrial habitat, now what happened is some of these reptiles, right? Some of the reptiles, again, they went back to water, right? Some of the reptiles, again, they went back to water and got evolved into something called as the fish-like reptile. They got evolved into fish-like reptile. They got evolved into fish-like reptile. One such example for a fish-like reptile, what we can give is called as ichthyosaurus. Ichthyosaurus, right? This is a fish-like reptile, ichthyosaurus, right? So what happened now? Once amphibians got evolved into reptiles, the reptiles now started dominating the entire terrestrial habitat, right? Now, Once they started dominating the entire terrestrial habitat, some of these reptiles, again, they migrated back to water. They went back into the water and got evolved into, right? And they got evolved into fish-like reptiles. And this fish-like reptiles, example is ichthyosaurs. They got evolved into fish-like reptile called as ichthyosaurs. Now what happened is most of these dinosaurs or larger reptiles, they became extinct, right? Most of the larger reptiles such as dinosaurs, they became extinct by the end of Cretaceous period. By the end of Cretaceous period, right? So by the end of Cretaceous period, this is an important one, what you need to remember, right? So by the end of Cretaceous period, these larger reptiles such as dinosaurs, they became extinct, right? So what we are seeing right now is the first, which organisms were formed first? Invertebrates were formed first, almost 500 million years ago. Once invertebrates were formed, then came in the jawless fishes, right? So these jawless fishes, almost 350 million years ago, some of these jawless fishes having a snout and lobed fins, they moved into the land and they got evolved into amphibians. Once amphibians have been evolved, amphibians later got evolved into reptiles. And these reptiles, since they were larger, stronger, they started dominating the entire terrestrial habitat. One such large reptile is this reptile, which is called as Tyrannosaurus rex, which was almost 20 feet tall, and they had huge dagger-like teeth. Right? Then some of the reptiles, now again, they started migrating back into the water and they got evolved into fish-like reptile. One example is this Ichthyosaurus, a fish-like reptile. Then what did we say? Most of these larger reptiles such as dinosaurs, they became extinct by the end of the Cretaceous period, right? So they became extinct by the end of this Cretaceous period. So this is what we have till now. Now what happened? Once the reptiles or the larger reptiles became extinct, what happened next is these reptiles now they got evolved into another group of organisms called as mammals, right? So these reptiles got evolved into mammals. Later on, few of these reptiles again, they got evolved into another class of organisms called as birds, right? So what are we saying here? These reptiles first, they got evolved into mammals, right? These reptiles first, they got evolved into mammals. Later on, few more reptiles, they got evolved into birds, right? So first mammals have been evolved from reptiles, then birds have been evolved from the reptiles, right? So the first mammals which was actually evolved, right? So the first mammal which was evolved was a shrew-like mammal. So this is the first mammal that has been evolved, right? So the first mammal that was evolved was a shrew-like mammal. So what do we mean by the term shrew? It is nothing but a small organism, just like how we have a rat. I hope all would have seen a rat. So the first formed mammal was exactly resembling like a rat kind of thing. Then again, the higher mammals came into picture, right? So this is how mammals have been evolved, right? So what did we see now? From the fishes, right? From the jawless fishes came in amphibians. While this jawless fishes, they moved into the land, they got evolved into amphibians. Now those amphibians, they got evolved into reptiles, right? Now these reptiles started dominating the entire world or the terrestrial habitat, right? Then some of the reptiles, they went back into the water and got evolved into fish-like reptile. One example is Ichthyosaurus, what we have here, right? Next. Reptiles, of the larger reptiles such as dinosaurs, they became extinct by the end of the Cretaceous period, right? Then what happened? Some of the reptiles got evolved into mammals, and the first formed mammals were actually like a shrew-like mammals, very small, a rat-like organisms. Later on, the reptiles, a few reptiles, they got evolved into birds, right? So we have seen how exactly all the organisms have been evolved. So once mammals started becoming larger, Even till date, mammals are the ones who are actually dominating the terrestrial habitat. Initially, it was reptiles who were dominating the terrestrial habitat, but now it is mammals who are actually dominating the terrestrial habitat. Now, we have seen everything so far, but what the scientists say is the success story pertaining to the process of evolution, right? So what they say is the success story in the history of evolution is actually the origin of humans, right? So that is the most successful part in the history of evolution. Which is the most successful part in the history of evolution? It is the origin of humans. Why humans are considered as a successful story in the history of evolution is because of their intelligence, right? Their self-consciousness, right? Their learning ability or language skills, right? So because of the language skills, the intelligence, as well as the self-consciousness seen in case of humans, the origin of humans is actually considered as the historic or the success story in the history of evolution. And today, if we see, humans are the ones which are actually dominating this entire terrestrial habitat, right? So this is what we have with the brief account of evolution. So how exactly different organisms have been evolved and all of that particular story, right? So this is what we have with the brief account of evolution. We are now come to the end part of this particular chapter called as the evolution. So the last topic what we are actually left out is with the human evolution, right? So let's begin with the human evolution. So I'll just give you a brief introduction regarding with this human evolution. So once we are done with human evolution, we are almost done. I mean, we are done with this particular chapter called as the organic evolution, right? So talking about human evolution, as we have already said, right, the success story, right, in the process of evolution is the origin of humans. Why again we say it is a success story? Because humans are the ones who are actually seen having language skills, intelligence, as well as self-consciousness, right? So let us begin with the human evolution, right? So most of the scientists believe that humans have been originated from ape-like ancestors, right? So most of the scientists believe that humans have been originated from ape-like ancestors, right? Ape-like ancestors. Let's get into the classification of the human beings. Humans belong to the order, right? Humans belong to the order called as primates, right? So humans belong to the order. Humans belong to the order called as primates, right? Then they belong to the class, right? Sorry, they belong to the suborder called as Anthropoidae, right? They belong to the suborder called as Anthropoidae, DAE, right? They belong to the suborder called as Anthropoidae. Now, humans belong to the superfamily. They belong to the superfamily called as Hominoidae, and humans belong to the family. Humans belong to the family called as Hominidae, and they belong to the subfamily called as Homininae, and they belong to the genus called as Homo, and species called as sapiens, right? So this is the basic classification of the human beings. All humans, they belong to the order primates, suborder Anthropoidae, superfamily Hominoidae, family Hominidae, subfamily Homininae, genus Homo, right? So genus Homo, and species is sapiens, right? So this is the basic classification what we have with regards to the human beings, right? With regards to the human beings, right? Now, most of the scientists actually believe that, right? Most of the scientists actually believe that almost 15 million years ago, right? Most of the scientists believe that almost 15 million years ago, primates such as Dryopithecus as well as Ramapithecus lived on the earth. right? So scientists believe that almost 15 million years ago, primates such as Dryopithecus and Ramapithecus, they lived on the earth. Now this Dryopithecus and Ramapithecus, they were actually said to be completely hairy. So their entire body was covered by hair, right? They were completely hairy and they walked like gorilla and chimpanzees, right? So they were completely hairy and they actually walk like gorillas and chimpanzees, right? Now what the scientists again say is this Dryopithecus, right? Dryopithecus was more of ape-like, right? So Dryopithecus was more ape-like, whereas Ramapithecus was more of man-like. Right? So Dryopithecus was more of ape-like and Ramapithecus was more of man-like. Right. Now keeping this aside, what most of the scientists still believe is they believe that most of the human evolution, right? Most of the human evolution would have taken place. They believe that most of the human evolution would have taken place in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Tanzania, right? So most of the evolutionary biologists, they believe that most of the human evolution would have taken place in the East African countries such as Kenya, Ethiopia, as well as Tanzania, right? And why they believe so is because of the fossils they have recovered, right? So they have discovered, right, in these places, they have discovered man-like bones, right? So they have discovered the fossils. They have discovered the fossils of man-like bones in this particular places, and through that they come to a conclusion telling that almost 3 to 4 million years ago, right? Almost 3 to 4 million years ago, man-like primates walked on, or they walked in East African countries, right? Almost 3 to 4 million years ago, man-like primates walked in the East African countries. And what the scientists still continue is, they still continue telling that these man-like primates were almost 4 feet tall, right? They were almost 4 feet tall and they started walking upright. They started walking straight. So that is what we have in the brief history pertaining to the process of evolution, right? So we'll stop here for today. In the next session, we'll start taking up different stages in the evolution of human beings. So what are the different stages in the evolution of human beings, and also the different characters associated with each evolutionary stage, right?